Talk to our special guest. Tonight our special guest is journalist Chris Trotter to help me make some sense of the latest release of the final papers in the President Kennedy assassination. The whole business has become so complicated with so many conspiracy theories in the air that a man like James Files can confess to killing Kennedy but is completely ignored because it doesn't fit the pet theories of countless investigators. Chris Trotter, welcome to The Beat Goes On. Hey, exciting program today. We're going to talk about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Did you follow it closely, Chris? Or?
Well, I was a very small boy when JFK was assassinated, but I still remember
Yes, I do.
where I was when I heard it. I encountered my mother weeping and asked her what was wrong, and she explained to me through her sobs that President Kennedy has been shot. So I knew who President Kennedy was, even at the tender age of 7, I think I would have been. And of course the newspapers were full of it, day after day, and I remember it was the Otago Daily Times that I was looking at. But all the imagery of Jackie and her widow's weeds and little John giving the salute and the riderless horse.
Now, as time went by, Chris, and you're a journalist, you've got a journalistic mind, inquiring mind, did you swallow the official story hook, line and sinker? Did you go along with the Warren Commission and
well,
it was the work of one man,
I
Lee
think,
Harvey Oswald?
like most people around the world, I accepted the official version. It does take some swallowing. The idea that someone with a bolt-action rifle could get off 3 more or less perfect shots in a very short period of time at a target that was moving.
Well, Christian, now you're on the program today because just recently, and you, as you told me, through legislation that President Trump has had to release the final papers, the assassination.
Well, I remember saying to Francesca, my wife, as these were being released, there'll be nothing in this great trove that will startle the world, because people who are planning to assassinate the leader of the free world do not leave memos around, do not leave minutes of meetings around, proposed that the President of the United States be assassinated, moved, Richard Helms, seconded Sam Giancana. I mean, that's not how these things happen.
But they got excited, didn't they? All these people got excited. Whoa, this is it. We're going to find out.
Well, yes. And as it turned out, there wasn't very much there.
No. So my theory is, and one of the reasons I want to talk to you today, even hidden in plain sight, if the killer was to come forward and there it is on YouTube, for instance, and say, I did it, and it could be verified that, yes, he did do it, there's just no way that the deep state are ever going to allow this person to be fully credible. And we have a person, his name is James Files, who made the case that he did shoot Kennedy. And he's of course, and we'll start from the beginning with James Files. He was 21 years old, he was a member of the mafia, and he was sent down to Dallas to do the original survey on the plaza, etc., and sort out the weapons. On the day of the killing, he was asked, would he like to fill in and do the shooting, and he chose the grassy knoll. James Files, finally in prison for killing 2 policemen, after much cajoling, finally confessed to doing the killing. So let's have a quick look at what he says about that first approach.
Chuck laughed at me and he says, no, he says, not him. He says, I'm talking about President Kennedy, JFK. And I looked at him and I said, what? He says, JFK. He says, your buddy. I said, well, he just busting, giving me a hard time when he knew JFK. He knew how much I disliked the man. I looked at him and I laughed. I said, okay, fine with me. You get an argument there. And at this point, I still kind of thought, he was just joking with me. But then he got real serious about it. And then we started talking, and he told me, he says, what I'm going to want you to do, he says, I'm going to look around. He says, we'll search the area around the town here. He says, you know everything pretty good. He says, and see where we're going to do it at, what kind of weapons we're going to need, and other things like that, he says. And he mentioned, he said he was going to bring Johnny Roselli in on it. Fine with me, and I don't care who we work with. You know, I like Johnny. I had no problems with him. And originally we'd planned to do it in the Chicago area, but certain people didn't like that idea. So then we put it off, and this is like 6 months before the assassination ever really took place.
Well, there he is. He's setting the scene. All he had to do was go down to Dallas, take the weapons down, and survey the whole scene. Now, the next thing is, when he gets down there, the first person that's assigned to help him is Lee Harvey Oswald.
We drove around Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald and I, we drove around Dallas right before the assassination. I did not see Lee Harvey Oswald on the morning of the assassination. But prior to that, Lee Harvey Oswald had been with me every day. We drove around. He showed me different streets, different areas. He was the one that took me out to the place southeast of Mesquite there, next to a big junkyard. We went out there in the field. He said, ain't nobody going to bother you out here, you know, because I wanted to calibrate the scopes for not only for the fireball, but for other weapons as well. And while I was out there firing weapons and ejecting shell casings, Lee was picking them up and holding them in his hand. Because I didn't want to leave no casings or nothing behind, and I'm busy firing, so I looked at Lee, grab them casings. And that's what he did. He picked them and he held on to them until we got released. I calibrated my scopes, set things up, put the stuff back in the car, and we got back in. We went riding around, and I wanted to know the railroad crossings. I wanted to wait and see what time trains come through. I want to know if there's any passengers, if there was freight trains, they stopped, the track's going to be blocked, the intersection's going to be blocked, dead-end streets, construction work, where every intersection was at, where all the lights were at, how long the lights were, they stayed red. I wanted all these little details.
That's very interesting, and it certainly comports with the theory that the assassination of Kennedy was a joint CIA mafia operation. It's common to all of the conspiracy theories regarding the assassination that Lee Harvey Oswald was involved, but that he was the designated patsy, something which he himself said to journalists shortly before he himself was assassinated. And therefore it would not be surprising if the mafia explanation for Kennedy's death, along with the CIA, it would not be surprising therefore if Oswald was involved with mob figures like Files claims to be, because of course Oswald was close to Jack Ruby.
That's right.
As well, another small-scale mafioso.
Well, based on exactly what you've just said, we'll have a look at the next clip where he meets Jack Ruby for the first time. So at this stage, I'd like our viewers, do any of you get the feel that James Files is telling the truth? Do you, when you're listening to him talk, his body language, everything do you feel that he's telling the truth? Let's have a look.
That morning when I got there, Johnny Roselli went there to meet somebody by the name of Jack Ruby. I had never knew Jack Ruby, nothing about him. When I got there and pulled into the parking lot, Johnny Roselli told me, he said, let me go in first, see where I'm going to sit, come in, position your stuff. And he asked me, he said, are you carrying? And I said, yeah, I'm carrying. He says, good. He says, when I sit down wherever I'm sitting at, he said, I don't know what may transpire. He said, something could go wrong. He said, but be very alert. He said, keep my backside covered. He said, I won't be in your line of fire. And I said, okay, I'll pick a open field of fire. I says, wherever I figure I can handle it. I said, I'll go sit down, I'll come in position myself. Johnny Roselli went in and they had like, you could call it a booth at the table sitting there, it wasn't bolted to the floor or nothing. But he sat down in that, and I went in shortly right behind him. I positioned myself at the counter, ordered a cup of coffee, was served, and sit there. And then I sit there and I watched until short, stocky-built man come in, walked over. Johnny got up, they shook hands. They sit down, they talked for a couple of minutes. I seen him take like a half size, like a legal envelope, but only half that size, out of his jacket, and he pushed it across the table to Johnny Roselli. He got up, they shook hands. This man left. Johnny waited maybe 2 minutes. Johnny looked at me. I got up. I walked out of the restaurant, made sure the area's clear, nobody outside in the parking lot. I went over, got in the car, started up. I pulled up by the door. Johnny Roselli walked out, got in the car, and we drove away. And then he opened up a piece of paper and he unfolded it. And there's been a lot of discrepancy over this part now. But Johnny Roselli said they only made one change in the route. It was a map of Dealey Plaza, the motorcade route. When he looked at it for Dealey Plaza, he said they've only made one alter, one change in it. He said, that's all. And I said, what's that? And he said, they're going to go down Elm Street. So they're going to stop and make a detour and come around this little street here. And he held it up, and I kind of glanced over at it, but I didn't get a chance to look at it real good at that point. But I already had reconned the area, so I knew what he was talking about. And I know everybody says, well, they had the motorcade in the newspaper weeks and months ahead of time. True, they did, but they didn't have that one change. And anybody who wants to show somebody a newspaper clipping, they better check it real close, because the original route, they was not coming down Elm Street there on that little detour where they had to slow down.
I believe him. I sense that he is telling the truth, but you don't.
No, I think the argument that tells against Files is the fact that he's still breathing, Gerard. I believe anybody associated with the actual killing of the president was dead certainly within 5 years of the assassination. And even at the upper levels of the outfit in Chicago, there were assassinations. Both Sam Giancana was assassinated, and Johnny Roselli, I think his remains were found floating in an oil drum in the Caribbean. The idea that James Files, one of the button men, one of the trigger pullers,
just a low-ranking member of the mafia, 21 years old.
Someone who possibly wasn't even a made man, just a soldier who was called in to bring down the guns and to scout out the killing zone. The idea that he would be left alive all these years, especially in those 5 years after 63, when so many people died.
Right. Well, let's watch now as he tells the story how he was recruited on that particular day. He was never meant to do the killing, but Johnny pulled out and James had to do it. Let's watch that.
While we're walking around, Charles Nicoletti asked me, he says, how do you feel about being backup? I said, what do you mean backup? He said, how would you feel about being backup as a shooter for me? I said, what happened to Johnny? What's with Johnny? And he said, Johnny's a little bit paranoid on this. He says, the CA's called the hit off. He said, they don't want the hit to go down. And I said, well, what'd you say? Chuck's exact words were, fuck them, it's going anyway. And I told him, I said, well, what about Johnny? He said, well, Johnny's good. Johnny will be with me, he says, but he's not going to be a shooter. He said, he doesn't want to go against the orders. He said, he's been told, he flew in here specifically to abort this assassination. He said, Jimmy, he says, you know we can't call this off. Only one man can stop it. He said, and he's here. If he wants us to stop it, he said, he'll notify me. He said, I'm not going on somebody else's word. He said, as poor as it is right now, I have a go, he says, from the boss. He says, we're going. There was only one man. Charles Nicoletti did not say his name at that point. He just said the boss. I knew he was referring to. He was referring to Sam Giancana. He was the number 2 man at that time. A lot of people's going to tell you he was number 1, but not true. Tony Accardo was still running things. He turned things over. He had Sam Giancana running all this operation and everything, but Tony Accardo was still the man, and he was still calling the shots on whatever went down, whatever was done.
Still no feelings that he may be telling the truth? It just doesn't ring true to you, does it?
Well, he knows a lot, but then anybody who's been in jail for as long as he has, with access to a correctional facilities library, is going to be able to familiarise themselves with all of those details. Now, I've never heard the name James Files, and if he was a lowly ranking member of the Chicago outfit, I just don't believe that they would have let a loose end as obvious as one of the people who fired the shots. I just don't see him being left alive, not by the mafia and certainly not by the CIA. But the CIA, if anything, has more to lose.
One final piece. Let's hear James discuss the day he actually pulled the trigger at the grassy knoll.
About 10:30 a.m., Mr. Nicoletti told me he asked me to be the backup shooter. And that was the first inkling of anything that I would ever be involved in the assassination itself. Prior to that, I was only know the area and transport weapons. Mr. Nicoletti asked me, said, if you back me up, Jimmy, he says, oh, where do you think would be the best spot for you? I said, well, the spot I like best is up on the grassy knoll behind that stockade fence. He says, why there? I said, I got the railroad yard for cover. I said, my clothes, I can turn my jacket inside out. I said, it's plaid on the inside. It looks like railroad workers. Somebody out there wearing a flannel shirt. Nobody's going to pay no attention to me. I said, I can go over there. I can walk around a piece of chalk, walk up and down by box cars, cross the railroad tracks, look at things. I'd just be another worker. Nobody'd even look at me. And he said, okay. He says, what weapon are you going to use over there? And I told him, and Chuck, I said, well, what's the situation? Chuck said, we're going for a headshot now. I said, this I understand. I realize this. He said, you're not going to fire unless it becomes a necessity. He says, if I miss, he said, then it's going to be up to you. He said, but you don't fire, he said, unless I miss. He said, it's going to be your call at that point. He said, so you got to be very alert on this. And I told him, don't worry about me. I said, I got it, boss. And he said, what are you going to use? I said, I'm going to use the fireball. And he looked at me and said, why? Why the fireball? Now, the fireball, for people who don't know what a fireball is, it's like a cut-down rifle. It's actually basically this long. The weapon was well ahead of its time. This was one of the prototypes that the agency had got a hold of that had been manufactured by Remington. Now, a lot of people are going to tell you that this particular weapon was not available at that time, but this weapon was available. It didn't go on sale until a few years later. But this weapon had been manufactured as early as 1961. We had a lot of trouble with the barrel blowing up on it, used too big a round on it or something, overloads in it. A lot of problems with it, but they finally reinforced the barrel. We got it where it worked pretty good. And Chuck asked me, he says, why the fireball? So you've only got one shot. Because the Remington Fireball 222 is a single shot bolt action pistol, and you can mount a scope on it. So, well, if I'm going to wait until you're through, I said, I'm only going to get one shot anyway, so it don't really matter. I said, because I'll never get a chance for a second shot if I wait until the last possible moment. He said, okay. He said, it's your call. Well, anybody that knows their weapons, this particular piece of sub is very accurate. Very accurate. It's up to 100 yards. At 100 feet, I'm talking about we're shooting now from the grassy knoll down to the highway to the street there. We're talking roughly 30, 35 yards. We're only talking 100 feet. This is like shooting fish in a barrel. So I'd walk away from the fence. I come back over, secured everything, got it ready. I could hear the rumble, the people murmuring, so you know the motorcade's approaching. So then I got ready, opened it up. I'm holding the Remington Fireball down below the fence at this point. Motorcade come down, I believe that's Main Street there, come down on Houston, turn back around on the Elm there, and come down that little side drive there. Oh, when it come down and made its first right, that's when I brought the weapon up. And then I'm over the fence, and as they come down, made the turn on down there, that's when I started focusing through the scope and following the car. As shots started ringing out, I started counting the shots, but I'm not counting like 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm counting them miss, 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 because I know we're going for the headshot. So I don't care how many rounds are being fired as long as we get a headshot. But I'm hearing the shots being fired, and I'm counting them as a miss, miss. And that's the only thing I'm concerned about. I've got this sign there for the Simmons Freeway that is fixing to come into my field of fire. As far as I can see at this point, the President has not been hit in the head at this time. I've seen the body lurch. I know he's been hit. How serious, I don't know. But my last instructions was we're going for a headshot. If you have to take a shot, take it. But don't fire unless it's a necessity, unless you really have to. He said, Jimmy, don't fire unless you have to. We want everything from the backside. I'm not asking why. Okay, whatever you say. At this point, as it starts to approach and come behind that freeway sign, and I've already been instructed not to hit anybody but Kennedy because they didn't want Jackie getting hurt or anybody else, I'm fixing to lose my field of fire. And at this point, either I shoot or I can put it in a suitcase and leave, one or the other. I took the shot. I fired one shot only. Well, I was aiming for his right eye, which to me is the left side of his head looking head on. But for him, it would be his right eye. And when I pull the trigger, I'm right in on it, and it's almost like looking 6 feet away through the scope. As I squeezed, take off my round, his head moved forward, I missed, and I coming right along the temple, just right behind the eye. I know I hit him right here. I know I hit behind the eye, somewhere within a half-inch diameter right there, say.
Well, there you go. That's pretty graphic what he's saying about being on the
Oh,
grassy knoll.
absolutely.
And
And the Zapruder
Yeah.
film
Yeah.
shows clearly what he describes.
Yes, exactly.
That's exactly what it looks like. It argues very, very strongly for a shot coming from the direction of the grassy knoll.
To finish it off, we're running out of time. This is all set off again with President Trump releasing those papers, and I'm weary of the whole thing. I think over the last 15 years, 20 years, there's been about 100 different theories about who did it. So here's another one. One guy in jail, and to me he seems authentic, absolutely authentic. But I also realise that hidden in plain sight, you could have a person that was absolutely genuine. He was the killer of JFK, but there's no way that they can allow that. The Warren Commission said that it was Lee Harvey Oswald, and there's no way that we can upset the apple cart.
There are a number of things to say about that. First of all, I think there was a tremendous impetus driven largely by J. Edgar Hoover and Lyndon Johnson to get the whole inquiry wrapped up as quickly as possible. I guess what I'm saying is, in that crucial 5 to 10 year period after Kennedy's assassination, someone like James Files would have been taken care of, because it was too close, and there are too many living, breathing people in the system who would have had their careers destroyed and may even have ended up in jail or executed if these things had come out. So James File is a plausible rogue. He certainly knows a lot about the assassination and makes a very plausible case for being one of the shooters. But as I say, the fact that he's still breathing is the best argument against him being genuine.
So now the big overarching philosophical thing is, even if a person does come forward that is genuine, that has actually done the job, even if it's not James Files, there's nothing we can actually ever do about it, because no one's ever going to be, we will never be allowed to believe him, because it'll upset the apple
Except
cart.
there are a tremendous number of JFK assassination enthusiasts who know a huge amount about the events prior to, on the day, subsequent to the assassination. If this guy was for real, I think every enthusiast, every conspiracy theorist with that longing to find the smoking gun, or at least the man who held the smoking gun, would have been onto the Sky Files like robbers' dogs. But it's been a remarkably quiet admission, it seems to me. In this age of the internet, you had to point this guy out to me. Well, say, look at this.
I'd like to say to our viewers, go to YouTube and just go, I shot JFK, James Files. Watch the 2.5 hours yourself, is prison confession, and I think people should make up their own mind. I think he's genuine, but you're not so sure.
I think he's plausible, but
Plausible?
I think if he had pulled that trigger, he'd be long dead.
Chris, good to see you again.
Lovely to be here.
Thanks for being on the Big